What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're going to be taking an early look at 5 late-round quarterbacks you guys should be targeting for the 2022 fantasy football season. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there, and let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. And lastly, make sure to check out our website, alldaypigskin.com, where you can get yourself a copy of the 2022 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Everything you can want at a great value. Top 150 overall player rankings in standard and PPR formats, individual player bios, projections, tiers, along with general fantasy advice. All the details in the description. But with that being said, let's get right into it. And as you can see, we have got our rankings here on Fantasy Pros of the right now, quote unquote, consensus top quarterback rankings. And I'm going to go straight into it here. So basically, we're talking guys outside of the first, 5, 6 rounds that are going to be potentially league winners, guys that you can have close to the double-digit rounds, but are going to be potentially QB1s or potential breakouts this season. Now, at first, we might start a little bit chalky, but I promise you the last couple of names here are really going to be intriguing selections and guys that I do think have great breakout potential that we haven't seen before. But let's start with some familiar names. First, we've got Russell Wilson of the now Denver Broncos. He's ranked here on Fantasy Pros as their 10th best quarterback. Now, again, in my rankings, I have him close to that spot as well, but I make a distinction. And that distinction is the fact that Russell Wilson has the ability to be like a tier 1 quarterback. We've seen it before in his time in Seattle because, there he had similar weapons when he was at his best. The Tyler Lockett, the DK Metcalf connection, a good rushing attack, a dependable defense. And now that's pretty much transplanted in Denver. I'd argue the weapons he has in Denver are better than, what he's had in Seattle ever. He's got a tremendous rushing attack, a pretty decent offensive line, a loaded wide receiver core. I mean, you've got Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick. The list goes on, and just a lot of depth in case there's injuries, and a pretty good defense on top of that as well. The big question with Russell Wilson is going to be whether he can sustain high level of play all season long. That's always been the thing in Seattle for him. I mean, Russell Wilson usually goes every single year on a span of 3, 4, 5 games where he's an MVP consideration. He's like a top 3 fantasy scoring quarterback. But the thing is, afterwards, it becomes a situation where he kind of goes on a cold streak. The Seahawks would then turn to the rushing attack. They wouldn't let him pass it all that much. But I think it's going to be a different situation here in Denver. He's in a division with Justin Herbert, with Patrick Mahomes, and with Derek Carr. There's going to be a lot of points here to be had, and I think that the Broncos are going to have to pass the football a lot, more than people expect, and Russell Wilson is going to be at the center point of all of that. So for that reason, Russell Wilson, even though, look, he's older, he's on a new team, we know some of the shortcomings he has, I'd definitely be taking a chance on him. I think he's a very viable quarterback 1 type of option. I'd probably have him in that tier 2 category, right around there, but definitely can make his way up to a top 5 quarterback, which is really what you're looking for here when you decide to look at the later rounds for quarterback solutions. And speaking of, later round options, let's continue on with Matthew Stafford here, who comes in at number 11. I think he is ranked way, way, way too low on these Fantasy Pro rankings. Personally, Matthew Stafford is right outside my top 5 quarterbacks. I mean, he pretty much did exactly that last season with the Rams, and now you could argue the Rams, in terms of weapons, have a better group than they did last season. I think Allen Robinson is an upgrade over Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp's still there. Tyler Higbee's there. You've got Darrell Henderson, Cam Akers. The offensive line, I will say, is going to be a little bit interesting because there's been some subtractions there, but I still think that they will be a good overall offensive unit, and the defense is going to be really good as well, so that should translate into more opportunities for the offense. But basically, I don't see how you can be ranking Matthew Stafford so much lower than what he finished as last season, which again was like right around the top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy football. And I think Matthew Stafford can absolutely do it again. I don't know whether it's people thinking that, the Rams are going to take a step back or that Matthew Stafford was carried by the team overall. Matthew Stafford is a baller. I mean, the guy, even back in Detroit, was throwing for over 5,000 yards, like when the only other person in the league to do that was Drew Brees. So Matthew Stafford is not somebody you should sleep on. I'd venture a guess to say that Matthew Stafford on other, ranking websites and on other draft platforms is going to be higher, but I specifically wanted to show you these rankings here because in my opinion, this is way, way too low for Matthew Stafford. I hope you guys agree because I think, yet again, I was pounding the drum for him last season. If you kind of wait on the quarterback position, getting Matthew Stafford later on is absolutely A-okay, and you'll be fine for the remainder of the year. And that's pretty much it. Same exact situation in 2022 as it was in 2021. But now let's get to some of these spicier names. And let's go with Trey Lance, who comes in at number 13 here per these rankings. Now, I would argue that Trey Lance, as of right now, shouldn't even be ranked because technically the 49ers haven't 100% committed and said he is going to be the guy starting week 1. They've alluded to it, but for me personally, until Jimmy Garoppolo is off of that roster, I can't say Trey Lance is going to play a full season. And that's kind of why I have guys like, a Deshaun Watson potentially lower on these lists as well, because there's question marks there. You don't know what the full picture scenario is going to look like for them. But when it comes to Trey Lance, let's go with the assumption that he plays the majority of the season. And if that's the case, I do think Trey Lance should be higher on these rankings. He then will make an appearance on my quarterback rankings as well. And he definitely has the upside. He reminds me of a Jalen Hurts type of guy from last season. There's going to be ups and downs, but it's the rushing upside here that you're looking for and what's going to save him for fantasy purposes. He has a great system around him. That's the thing that I really personally like. With Kyle Shanahan, with all the weapons in San Francisco, a good offensive line. You've got great wide receivers, Deebo Samuel, Brennan Ayuk, George Kittle, if you want to throw him in terms of pass catchers. And then you've got Elijah Mitchell, who really showed up last season. Now, personally, in my opinion, I think Trey Lance is going to kind of, hurt the fantasy value of all those other guys. But when talking about just him in particular, that's not going to impact his value. I mean, his value could potentially skyrocket. He could still potentially break out even by hurting those other guys. And the reason I say that is because he's a very different quarterback from Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a guy that could potentially have close to 100 rushing yards every single game. And that's why he's being drafted so high and with those aspirations. Now, he's still going to be drafted, I would say, outside of the top 7, 8, 9 quarterbacks. So that's why he can fit into this category. Again, I do think there's going to be ups and downs, but I like the, potential prospects of success here more than the risks. And considering that the draft price isn't all that high at the moment, it would be a risk that I am willing to take. Now, I anticipate that if Trey Lance is officially named the starter prior to the start of the season, his ADP will go up a few spots, but I still would go ahead and say that he would be ranked outside of the majority of people's top 10 quarterbacks because, he's not going to be ahead of a Kyler Murray or a Joe Burrow or a Jalen Hurts or a, Russell Wilson, Stafford, Brady, for example. So for that reason, I do think Trey Lance is a very intriguing player. The only thing that I would say is here with Lance that you just need to wait a little bit before potentially going all in on him. So that's the only thing. But now let's move on to the number 14 guy on this list, and that is Derek Carr. And Derek Carr, for me, is actually my favorite quarterback this season. He is my breakout candidate for 2022. I love everything about Derek Carr. Quietly, he almost threw for 5,000 yards last season in Las Vegas. And when you look at his weapons, it was pretty much just the Hunter Renfrow show. So to me, that's extremely, extremely impressive. Now, add on to that the fact that Devonta Adams is a part of this group, one of the top 3 wide receivers in the NFL. And, sure, he's going from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr, but I do think that Derek Carr can sustain that type of production for Devonta Adams. And Devonta Adams, just by being there, is going to open things up so much for those other weapons. And speaking of those other weapons, you've got Darren Waller returning from injury. You've still got Hunter Renfrow there, who proved that he can be a tremendous wide receiver. Now, the difference is he's probably going to be the second or third option this season behind Waller, behind Devonta Adams, but that doesn't matter. That's going to help Derek Carr more than anything. You've got a good offensive line. You've got reliable running backs. I really think that Derek Carr can have like a Matthew Stafford type of season from last year, and that's going to be a borderline top 5 quarterback. And honestly, it wasn't too long ago when Derek Carr had like an MVP type of year. Then he kind of got nicked up, injured, and since then it hasn't reappeared. But I think all the pieces surrounding Derek Carr are viable, and they can precipitate success for Carr as well. I absolutely love drafting him. If I've punted on the position, people are probably valuing him as a backup quarterback or as a quarterback 2. I disagree. I think he is a legit quarterback 1 this season. But let's wrap things up now here with the number 18 guy on these rankings per Fantasy Pros. That is Tua. Tua of the Dolphins. And the thing with Tua is this is probably going to be his last chance to prove if he can be the guy for Miami. I mean, they've surrounded him with all the weapons that you could want. They've upgraded the offensive line, which is a big, big issue last season. They obviously traded for Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, another year of experience. You've still got Gesicki. You've added so many running backs that I can't even keep track of. Again, if Tua can't get it done this season, that'll probably be it for him in terms of his time with Miami. But in terms of the opportunity for success short term this season, I do like it. Now, most people aren't going to be drafting Tua as a starter, and for the most part, I understand why the consistency hasn't been there. Maybe you're worried about the injury history, all viable things to say, but when you're getting a guy that is surrounded by those types of weapons that I think has 4,000 passing yards as, a pretty decent possibility, and somebody that is just in a much more improved situation with a new head coach that's done really good things in his time with the 49ers. I really like the upside here for Tua. It's not going to cost you anything. In fact, a lot of drafts could end with Tua being a guy that's available off of waivers, so not being drafted at all. I would definitely be taking a chance on Tua. Let's say you're not as high on him. That's perfectly fine. You select a quarterback earlier on at some point in time, even though, again, like the whole point of this video is to find some of those later round quarterbacks that can be gems. But if you then just, take a flyer on Tua and say, I'm going to keep him on the bench for a couple of weeks to see how it goes, I definitely support that idea because I think he can take advantage of the situation. And if he doesn't, well, we won't have to play this will he, won't he game going forward, because then we will know for a fact that he probably isn't the solution and the Dolphins will be moving on from him. But other than that, we kind of wrap up this breakdown with Tua. And again, to recap some of these names: Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Trey Lance, Derek Carr, Tua. Because the name of the game in fantasy football is trying to find that breakout quarterback, or basically a quarterback discount in the later rounds, so you don't have to waste a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick on a quarterback, because instead of doing that, you can get a running back 1 or a wide receiver 1 at those junctures, and you can really set your roster apart. So that's the whole point of being able to hit on these later round quarterbacks, and you see it every single season, being able to identify those guys. Last year, it was guys like Justin Herbert, Matthew Stafford that we highlighted. The year before, guys like, let's say, Kyler Murray, the list goes on and on. The point being, this is the strategy you want to follow. You don't want to pay a high price for guys that have already broken out because that's going to put you behind the 8 ball at those skill positions, which are, in my opinion, more important in fantasy football. But hey, let me know if you agree, disagree in the comment section. Who else would you add to this list? Do you agree with these takes? If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe again, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And make sure to get yourself a copy of the 2022 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Everything you can want at a great price, details in the description. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.